Hello, welcome to the Edge of the Box podcast, a podcast by WhoScored.com. I'm your host, Dan Bardell, joined by Dr. Jonathan Wilson and our new signing for the new season, George Elek, who I've worked with before and I'm really looking forward to having on this podcast. We are here to preview week one of the Premier League, but we're going to look a little bit at the transfer business of teams as well and do some general predictions, and I've also thrown in some trivia, which I'm sure everyone will enjoy. So let's start with transfers then. George, I'll come to you first, put you under pressure on your debut. Is there any signings that you think have gone under the radar this summer, as in they'll turn out to be a really important player, but not many are talking about them?
It's 2023, Dan. I don't think any signings go under the radar these days. Every single one is greeted as if it's like a long-lost relative. I guess the ones that come at the beginning of the summer that maybe get forgotten about, I think Joao Pedro in at Brighton is one that I'm really excited to see. It's a deal that kind of everyone knew was going to happen for the last couple of months of last season. He wasn't really in the Watford squad much. I know that in his previous campaign at Premier League level, he didn't necessarily set the world alight, but he is a different physical specimen now. He is incredibly talented. Like, I don't think people have quite realised quite how good he could be in terms of his actual ball playing ability, his flair levels. He's just a very exciting attacking player who's no longer quite physically weak, which maybe could have been levelled at him in his previous campaign at Watford. And at Brighton, he's at basically the perfect club to unlock his potential. Previously at Watford, he's been playing in fairly poor sides where just him and Ismail Assar have been like the two outballs, and he's been kind of doubled up on for the most part. I think playing for a De Zerbi side who are so good in transition and with a load of space to exploit, where he's going to be one cog in a machine, is really exciting. So, yeah, I guess people were talking about it a lot when it happened. It was quite a long time ago now, so I'm going to count that as being under the radar.
I think that's on 3 players whilst the season was actually still hadn't finished.
Yeah,
City certainly had some games left while those signings were being made.
Well, so Joao Pedro, I first time I saw him in live, Watford played Spurs on, I think it was New Year's Day, and Watford in that game actually played really well the first half hour of the second half. Then there was a long stoppage because of the medical emergency in the crowd, and Tottenham were able to regroup, and they went on to win it 1-0. Sometimes you see a play and you think, hang on, why is he not starting games? Why is nobody talking about him? And you start thinking, have I got the good 45 minutes he's played in his life? But then I saw a bit of him in the Championship last season when I was at 2 Watford games live, and again, you sort of think he's better than that level. He should be playing at a higher level. And I think Brighton signings generally are just interesting because they're so good at this. And I think one of the things that we often get wrong about signings, or it's too easy to think that all players in the world, you can rank them, but he's the best and he's the worst, and they all just sort of stick in that long line. Brighton have done really well because they've signed the 15th best of those players, which isn't the way it works at all. It's different players work in different systems with different players around them. And I think he could be a really good example of that, of somebody who wasn't hugely successful at Watford, but in an environment where they know exactly what they're getting, where Brighton are extremely good at getting players to fit their system. And quite often you see players leave Brighton who don't particularly play well. Marco Correa, I'm looking particularly at you.
Yeah,
I'm really excited to see what he does. And also Mahmoud Dahoud. He's one of those players who was really hyped sort of 4 or 5 years ago in Germany and sort of disappeared. Or it didn't disappear, but he was no longer sort of the coming thing that you sort of think he's about to move to the Premier League. And now, age 27, he has. I wonder if signing him is a sort of acknowledgement that Caicedo might be on his way. Not exactly the same, but sort of similar roles. The fact they've brought in Milner as well, I think it's really interesting that Brighton now, they're obviously very good at picking up teenagers, but they're also picking up slightly more experienced older players. Yeah. They're the two who I sort of think we as a football culture may not be as excited about as we ought to be.
Well, one other that I wanted to mention, just to, I've seen a lot of people laughing about the signing of Mads Andersen from Barnsley to Luton, kind of joking that Luton have got the Premier League and have started signing League One centre-backs. My prediction here now at the beginning of the season is that if Luton do go down, a different Premier League club will buy Mads Andersen, because he's a brilliant, towering centre-back who should have never been playing League One football last season. He basically decided to give it one last try at Barnsley to see if they could win promotion. He's very, very good and will suit the way that Luton play perfectly. So he's another one to delete those tweets if you've made the gag about Mads getting moved to the Premier League.
And if I can add another one who's not actually a signing, but a signing that didn't happen, and therefore he's remained at Chelsea, is Ian Maatsen. He was on his way out. Pochettino had stopped the transfer, and everything I've heard about him from people at Chelsea, they were baffled by the fact that the club were willing to get rid of him. And the idea is a link up between him and Colwell as a ball playing left side centre back and a very attacking left back. That could be really exciting.
Should mention as well for viewers of the show, George will mention any obscure AFL player he can during the show, and he's already done that. Up to a flying
EFL
start.
All-Stars there. Joao Pedro, Ian Maatsen, we're doing well. Mads Anderson. Who else can we get in?
Those players haven't made the Who Scored best signing 11. It's the most niche formation I've ever seen in my life, so I'll just run through it now. We've got Vicario in goal, who Tottenham Hotspur have signed. I should say these ratings are based on last season, obviously. A back three of Timber, Diassi and Pau Torres. Then a diamond midfield of Declan Rice, Sandro Tonali, McAllister and Szoboszlai. So Szoboszlai is kind of playing as a 10 there, I'm assuming. And then a front three of Diaby and Kunku and Maddison. I mean, Jonathan, we've been willing Who Scored to move away from 4-4-2 for years there.
Yeah, go back to it.
They've taken it too far. I can't even work out that system.
It's not too far off being a sort of Pep style WM, isn't it? A 3-2-2-3. So I guess you could have Rice and Szoboszlai as the two wing halves, and Tonali and Szoboszlai as the inside forwards.
It's attacking. Anyone from the AFL that should be in that 11, George? Out of those signings that we've just mentioned in the 11, which signing takes their new team to the next level the most? Jonathan, your turn first.
I just don't think teams get taken to a new level by signings. They stick within their levels. That's what modern football is about. Arsenal at the start of last season, nobody thought were a title challenger coming second team. Yeah, I think signing Declan Rice and possibly Kai Havertz, although it slightly depends how he's used, and I don't think he should be used as they use him in the Community Shield. They are two expensive, big-name, high-class players who, if they get the best out of them, could make Arsenal regular title contenders. Now, does that mean that they've moved up a level, given they finished second and were the closest challenger last season? You might argue that it doesn't mean that, but I think it makes them better as a squad.
I mean, 12 months ago, there's absolutely no chance Arsenal sign Declan Rice, but they were title challengers last year. If they're title challengers again, that probably hasn't taken them to the next level. A signing I want to tout is Moussa Diaby at Villa, because Villa, since they returned to the Premier League, every summer they've bought a wide attacking player. And it seems like every year they've kind of got a better player in, and it feels like Moussa Diaby is a better level than the previous wide players that Villa have had, because he looked electric in pre-season.
Yeah, I agree. But normally we're sitting here in August and we're talking about, this time last year it was Leon Bailey, wasn't it, where you're expecting a player to come in and step up. And I think it's probably fair to say that none of those kind of big signings for Villa in recent seasons have quite hit the heights that you're hoping that they would. I do think Pau Torres is another interesting signing for Villa, where when you're talking kind of in the same way that I agree with Jonathan, I don't really think that a signing elevates a team to that level. We all love players, but I think the obsession with transfers in itself is disproportionate to the impact that they actually necessarily have unless they're in the right environment. There's no way. Well, I don't think that Pau Torres moved to Villa a year ago. I think it's a sign of Unai Emery's arrival at the club and the clout that brings. And I think with Moussa Diaby, you're probably looking at a similar story. So it's a good indicator of where a club has got to. I think with Tonali and Newcastle, it's a similar story as well. Yeah. It's pretty amazing when you consider the Premier League has always been touted as the best league in the world or whatever else. And whether you believe in that or not, I'm not really sure. But this feels like a new era of the Premier League where top level elite players are signing for teams without any guarantee of European football full stop at the end of the season. And that's fairly significant. Let's
move away from signings then and get on to the game week preview. And we're going to start with the first Premier League game of the season, which is Burnley against Manchester City on Friday night. Jonathan, I'm assuming you watched the Community Shield yesterday. I haven't spoken to you, so I don't know for a fact. But if you did, what did you make of Manchester City? Did you think that the being 2 weeks behind in terms of fitness played a part?
Probably. I didn't think either side played particularly well. I thought it was a pretty disappointing spectacle. And they were 1-0 up until a pretty unlucky equaliser conceded in the last minute. So it wasn't like the previous season when we were sort of making a direct comparison between Haaland and Darwin Nunez and getting exactly the wrong call. That there's a lot of talk then that is Haaland really going to fit in this side? Nunez looks amazing, and within a month, everybody changed their minds. I think what Aaron Ramsdale said about it being a statement win psychologically, given that they lost their last 8 games against City, it is a big win for Arsenal. If they lost, it would have felt very much that I was just plodding along the same familiar path. Well, it does feel slightly different now. Community Shields, generally, they don't matter until suddenly they do. So I think, you might disagree, you might think of another example, but I think the last Community Shield that actually mattered was 2015 when Mourinho's Chelsea lost to Arsenal. And that was the first time Arsenal had beaten Chelsea in, I can't remember, a long 20-odd games, I think it was. Or maybe they'd won like 1 out of 20-odd. But it was, it ended a long run of poor form against Chelsea. And also Mourinho's whole sort of demeanour that day, you could tell something was awry. Possibly this is a sign that Arsenal are a bit tougher than they maybe have been. But equally, it could be in 3 or 4 weeks that we're looking back at that thinking, City were just off the pace because they weren't quite ready because their season went on longer last season.
Do you not think there's an argument with this one? I mean, I think that generally they're irrelevant, but Pep's reaction to the opening goal kind of triggered the game mattering in a way where, like, he showed his hand, presumably because he thought he was on his way to a victory, and gave it the big one in the touchline and a big celebration, which kind of validated any reaction from Arsenal in terms of feeling like they got an upper hand.
Guardiola had won and Man City had won. He would have said it was important, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Well, I guess from his point of view, he won 3 trophies last season. This is a chance to win 4 this season. Obviously, he's got the League Cup as well. I wonder as well, that celebration, whether that was the fact it was Cole Palmer who scored. I don't know. Maybe that contributes to it. If you want to find an excuse for him, that would be the excuse you use, I guess.
I mean, this isn't the trivia, but we're saying, is it important? Can you name me the previous 3 Community Shield winners?
Well, so Arsenal won it on Sunday.
Don't include that one, Jonathan. Don't be smart.
Liverpool,
no, smart ass. Liverpool,
the season before.
Yeah.
Leicester the season before.
Yeah.
So City won the league again. So City must have won it.
No, it was Arsenal.
Really?
Yeah.
Who did they beat?
I haven't got a clue, but I just looked at it before we came on.
Yeah, Arsenal beat Liverpool on penalties in front of an attendance of 0.
And I have no memory of that game. We were just talking about Cole Palmer, sorry. Is he equipped to replace Riyad Mahrez in Manchester City squad? Because to me, Manchester City squad still looks a little bit on the small side. Gvardiol's probably going to replace Laporte. I would expect Laporte to move on. Kovacic was being looked at anyway, but essentially is a replacement for Gundogan at the moment. So Man City I think they're short.
Yeah, I mean, at that level, it's so hard for these, the academy graduates to kind of get enough minutes to be considered a replacement because the level is so high and because of the amount of money City can spend in order to bring players in. I really hope Palmer is given the opportunity. He's had a magnificent summer. Of course, with the under-21s, I think he's a quality prospect. But when you consider, with Phil Foden's introduction to first-team football, like everybody knew that Foden was destined to be a City first-team player. It feels like hopefully that's the case with Palmer. But even then, it took, 18 months for Foden's kind of transition from being a bit part academy player into being a first-team regular. And then even last season, he lost his place again. So I hope that is the case. I've spoken to managers before about it's very difficult for a manager to invest their faith in youth when it's their job that is basically that's in jeopardy if things go wrong. Like, why would a manager who's only going to be at a club for another 18 months bother blooding a 17-year-old when he's not going to be there to kind of bear the fruit? With City, that isn't the case. We know that Guardiola's job is basically as safe as he'd. It's as safe as he wants it to be for the duration of his time there. So hopefully we see Palmer get more opportunity. We saw it obviously with Lewis last season as well. So fingers crossed that this is the beginning of a breakout season for him.
And have we learned our lesson from 12 months ago, Jonathan? Haaland very quiet in the Community Shield this year, just like he was 12 months ago. But essentially he did prove last year that it doesn't really matter.
The concerns about Haaland up to the World Cup were fair enough. He was scoring goals, but you could tell that he didn't quite fit in the team. And I think the biggest example of that was the game at Old Trafford, which was that towards the end of January, maybe beginning of February. And it was shortly after that it clicked and suddenly he wasn't just scoring goals, but also the team was working well around him. So I don't think anybody's got any doubts about Haaland. The point you make about City being slightly short, and obviously this is we're talking in very relative terms. Mahrez was useful to them in that he was a player who popped up with quite a lot of useful goals. Goals in games where the game had been a bit flat, and suddenly he would do something and break the game. I think Gundogan even more so, and he's done it the last 2 seasons. That last sort of 6 weeks of both of those 2 seasons, he scored a lot of vital goals. Kovacic, for lovely player that he is, will not give you that. Kovacic just doesn't score goals. That is something they might be missing. And you think of the first 11, it's really not a problem playing Bernardo Silva on the right. I think that is actually how they looked best even when Mahrez was there. But if you want to play Bernardo Silva in midfield, if De Bruyne's not there, then they are a little bit short on that right-hand side. So they're 2 areas where you'd say they definitely are not as strong as they were last season.
Yeah, you're right. Kovacic is a magnificent footballer. I thought he had a good game yesterday, but he won't give you those moments that Gundogan did give you towards the end of the season. They're completely different types of players, and he'll be a huge miss, Gundogan, with his leadership as well. So it'd be interesting to see what City do coming up to the end of the window. Last year, they sprung a surprise near the end and got in Akanji, who we all thought they didn't really need, and turned out to be a brilliant signing, probably one of the most under-the-radar signings that they're actually was in the summer window last time around. So we'll see what Pep comes up with. George, let's talk about Burnley then. A lot of players have come through the door coming off the back of a sensational season in the Championship, where Vincent Kompany deserves a huge amount of credit for how he pulled it all together so quickly with a completely new team. I haven't got Burnley down as being in any trouble this year. I think they play a style of football that will suit the Premier League, and I think home form, I think they'll do really well. Any of their new signings stand out for you?
I'm intrigued to see basically all of them. I'm really excited by Burnley this season. I think James Trafford in goal is it's not a surprise that City have put a buyback clause in his contract, because he's someone who, if he continues his progression as he has done, he was brilliant at Bolton last season, great for the under-21s.
Yep.
A possible future England number 1 there, who'll come straight into the side. Jordan Bayer, their centre-back, who they had on loan last season at Borussia Mönchengladbach. They've signed on a permanent who's very good. Dara O'Shea, again, a young centre-back from West Brom who's really impressive. I can't proclaim to have seen much of their £20 million or £80 million striker, Zeki Amdouni, who comes in from Basel with a decent goal-scoring record. But their recruitment, basically since the new ownership group came in last summer, has been, they've barely missed, basically. Like Manuel Benson came in, Anna Saruri came in, Nathan Tennant on loan. Like these players, Josh Cullen, their hit rate was unbelievable. So if there's a club, we always talk about Brighton and Brentford, they always recruit well, and you trust whoever they're going to bring in. At this stage with Burnley, I think it's basically the same, where whoever is doing their recruiting, whatever model they're using, is clearly flagging some high quality talent. So I'm really excited to see how they get on. As you say, they were magnificent last season in Kompany. We've got a manager who, I imagine, if things progress the way that we expect them to, he's got to be front of the queue to replace Guardiola whenever Guardiola does move on. And I, rather than thinking that Burnley are a team that you could see getting relegated back to the Championship, I think in time they're probably more likely to follow the likes of Brighton and Brentford in terms of trying to break into that higher group of teams in the Premier League.
Well, they've replaced Nathan Tella with Nathan Redmond, so Nathan for Nathan. That's my expert analysis on Burnley.
Tella still might be going back, though. He's a quality player, and they seem to be... it seems like Burnley just keep coming in with bids that they know Southampton are going to reject. But we know that normally that ends up... there's still a few weeks of the window left.
Jonathan, can you make any kind of case for Burnley getting anything against Manchester City on Friday night?
It could happen. I mean, start of the season, City, I think we saw at the weekend, are nowhere near what they should be, or what they will be later in the season. Burnley at home, the atmosphere there, you know that it's kind of, it's a tight ground that does generate a good atmosphere. Maybe they catch City a little bit cold. But you saw the FA Cup game last year, City are way, way better. So it's really difficult for them. But then Kompany might have learned from that. He may be less inclined to be gung-ho in the league than he was in the Cup. There's a point in drawing this game, whereas last season you might think, well, a draw just delays the inevitable. Whereas taking a point would be very good. So I don't expect it, but it could happen.
Let's move on to Newcastle against Villa, which is the Saturday tea time offering. 2 big success stories from last season, George. Now, everyone knows I'm a Villa fan because I bring it up every single week, and you can see the shirts behind me. But I was actually making the point the other day at work that I don't think there's too much difference between Villa and Newcastle in terms of squad. I think last season, Villa just gave Newcastle a 13-game head start with Steven Gerrard as a manager. But actually, if you look at the league table since Unai Emery joined, it's close. between them in terms of points taken. So actually, if you look at the depth of each squad, I don't think there's much in it at all. I think it's two even teams.
Yeah, I don't disagree at all. It doesn't help you in this game, but in terms of over the course of the season, the fact that Newcastle have, Champions League football to contend with. I know that Villa are in Europe as well, but Villa are probably more licensed to rotate than Newcastle will. So that should help you out. Although I guess Villa are probably more likely to go deep in the competition than Newcastle are. Both squads. There's no denying that Villa's squad was massively underperforming. I think both sides have serious expectation levels this season, and the only concern, in my point of view, is that the league generally looks a lot stronger. Last season was pretty anomalous in that you had a Chelsea team picking up 44 points, a Tottenham team where there was basically a civil war. I mean, that's not necessarily the most unlikely, but over the campaign, Tottenham were by no means at the level we'd necessarily expect. Liverpool dropped off massively. So it was kind of well set for teams like Newcastle and Villa to be able to put a good run together and force their way into the reckoning. I'm not convinced that will happen this time around. So, I do worry a little bit for both Eddie Howe and for Unai Emery that they're going to be judged based on their league position rather than necessarily the performance level, which they could still improve, but still fall back. So, but yeah, I mean, Villa have a quality squad. I'm really excited to see what Ollie Watkins does this season. And I think he's already had about 3 breakout seasons in his career, but it does feel like in this campaign for this manager and the quality around him, he could have a personal, his best personal season so far.
Tonali's come in at Newcastle, Jonathan, a really high level player. That's a great sign for Newcastle. I think the way he plays, he'll adapt to the Premier League in a few months and be a sensational signing. Harvey Barnes has come in for Alan St-Maximin. I don't think Livramento's been completed yet, but that'll be on the verge of happening. It looks like he's coming in. So 2 bodies stronger. As I say, St-Maximin's gone. Barnes has come in. You can debate whether that's a step up in quality or not. It probably is in terms of goal and assist productivity. But have Newcastle done enough so far in this window, considering they are about to embark on a Champions League campaign?
I don't know. It's a difficult balancing act because if you bring in half a dozen players, then you risk unbalancing everybody. So I think you probably would rather risk a little bit of fatigue than sort of risk the morale of the whole place. I guess they probably, Livramento and then maybe one more of a high level. I mean, I know they brought in Yukibi Mintel, this 19-year-old Gambian winger, who I'd be amazed if we see much of him, but it means they are still sort of it's somebody to play in League Cup games, I guess, is the point of that. Yeah, the squad wasn't huge last season, so the Champions League will put strain on them. Plus, I think it puts psychological strain. If you're they're going to be in pot 4 of seeds, so the chances are they're going to get 2 big teams. If you're playing Napoli on the Wednesday and then the following Tuesday you're playing Real Madrid, and on the Saturday you've got Burnley away, that's a difficult thing psychologically to kind of keep yourself going for. That inevitably that middle game gets a bit lost. So and Eddie Howe's got no experience of that. So we'll see how he deals with that. But I think it's a really nice game for the first day of the season. They're 2 teams who you sort of expect to be 4th in a great season, maybe down to 8th or 9th, going against each other when there is no issue of fatigue or anything. So it's what I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, I think it'll be a really good game. It was a great game at Villa Park when Newcastle were going really well. Villa absolutely dismantled Newcastle 3-0 in that game. Probably the best I've ever seen an Aston Villa side play. Actually, I would say, but you're right. I think it's 2 high-level teams who've brought in good players, had great seasons last time round as a curtain raiser for both teams. I think it will be a really, really exciting game.
I mean, Moussa Diaby, fine. 9 goals for Leverkusen last season, clearly has talent. You slightly worry that he, as we said, he replicates that pattern of Villa signing wide forwards who don't quite come off. Pau Torres and Yuri Tielemans, I have slight doubts about both of them, but Pau Torres I think is a little bit slow on the turn. I'd worry about that. I think he's great in the air, but I would worry about him against pace, particularly if Villa push up. I mean, obviously Emery's worked with them before, so he knows what he's doing there. But that would always be my doubt about Pau Torres. And Tielemans, Leicester fans fell out of love with him in a pretty big way last season. That I think, lovely on the ball, will score 2 or 3 beautiful goals every season. But I'm not sure that he's the bravest player when things start to go wrong. Maybe that's why they're going to Villa. If they didn't have a doubt about them, they'd be going to the Champions League club.
And also, does pre-season form count for anything? I don't think so.
Big time in this case, George. Big time. I think what they've tried to do, Villa, they've tried to. There's not much European experience within that squad. Obviously, they've got the perfect manager to be in the Europa Conference League, but they've signed Pau Torres, who's used to playing Sunday, Thursday, and used to having midweek European adventures, and has worked with Emery before. Tielemans has done the Sunday, Thursday thing before at Leicester, and Diaby is another one who's used to playing European football. So I think they've tried to get a high level of player in, but players that have played in Europe, because, as I say, the squad hasn't got much experience of that. And I think Pau Torres, for example, he won't need to be rushed in and put in straight away in the Premier League. I think Villa will start the season with Konsa and Mings, because Villa's defence towards the back end of the season was absolutely excellent. And then I think maybe in the European games, you'll see Pau Torres and Diego Carlos, who's fit again now, play as the centre-backs, the two with European experience. It won't be as straightforward as that, but I think that might be what you see in the early weeks. And I think because, the Europa Conference League should be easier for Villa than the Champions League will be for Newcastle, I think you will see Ollie Watkins will not play in the Europa Conference League in the group stage. It will be Cameron Archer, who's come back from successful EFL loans. He'll be the striker in the European games. Bailey will probably play instead of Diaby. Two centre-backs I've just mentioned. One of Douglas Luiz or Kamara will drop out and Tielemans will come in. So I think Villa have signed players on that basis, in my opinion. But I think, the trust is completely there for the Villa fans. Unai Emery's in full control of what Villa are doing transfer-wise and everything football-wise. But I think the Villa fans just completely trust him. So whatever he decides, everyone's happy with. But yeah, really exciting game, and two teams that should have really exciting seasons. Let's look at Chelsea against Liverpool now. Two teams that didn't have their ideal seasons last time round. Both teams have made a lot of signings. Jonathan, Chelsea in particular have had quite a lot come in. A lot of young players come back off loans as well. Liverpool have actually lost probably more players than they expected. So it's been an interesting window for both so far, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, Chelsea, I think they've only brought in 4 senior players, but after huge upheaval last season. Liverpool, but let's do Liverpool first, because that's easier in some ways. Liverpool clearly last season, this year with the midfield, they needed to rejuvenate it. The question is, have they rejuvenated too much? So bringing in McAllister, Szoboszlai, and losing Milner and Henderson and Fabinho, they've gone from an average age of just over 30 to an average age of sort of 22, 23. And if Lavia comes in as well, then that gets even lower. That suggests to me that they think Bajcetic is going to be playing regularly this season, and it really is as good as he looked when he looked good last season. And he'll turn 19 during the season. But you would have concerns about a midfield where the oldest player is 24. Then you look at Chelsea, and their oldest player midfield is 23, and it's Conor Gallagher. You look at Chelsea's back four, or you look at their centre-back, and yes, you've got Thiago Silva, who's 38. And then I think the next oldest is Wesley Fofana, who's A, never fit, and B, 22. So you're then dropping down to Badiashile, who's, I think, is he 19? Yeah, 18, 19.
Diaz's come in now, hasn't it? 25. He's 25, but hasn't got experience.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Levi Colwill, I think will play regularly, but he's 21, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, you look even at the forward line. Yes, you got Raheem Sterling, who's 28, but you then get down pretty quickly to players in their early 20s. In terms of centre forwards, the only one they've got is Jackson, who in his entire career has started 16 league games at the top level. So it could be very exciting, but you sort of think it's going to take you at least a year or two to really settle down. And you wonder whether Chelsea can really afford that, or whether they need to start getting in the Champions League and getting that revenue pretty quickly.
Yeah, it's tough, isn't it? I think they've got the right manager for the project, but I just don't think that they're magically going to be finishing top 6.
I think it'd be an extraordinary achievement to finish top 4, and it'd be a worthwhile achievement to finish 6th.
But the only, the big caveat to all of this, and I agree with you, is just European football is massive, and we've seen that consistently over the years, that a team who has such an aberration of a season like Chelsea and Spurs did last season and end up finishing out of the places entirely normally bounce back. And that might not be by design, but it's mainly because at the back end of a season, when the teams around them are playing Saturday, Tuesday, or Saturday, Wednesday, or Saturday, Thursday, it's very hard to maintain. You are much fitter, you have fresher players, and therefore you're able to pick up points at a higher rate. We saw Chelsea win the league under Conte in that guise. We saw Arsenal somehow transpire to not finish top 4, but But clearly that season under Arteta, where they didn't have European football, was a big boost in terms of kind of getting them back on track. So Chelsea's signings, I think in Nkunku, we spoke about under the radar signings. I don't really understand. I know he's injured now for the start of the season, but it feels like a rare case where one of the most, sought after young attacking talent in Europe has come to the Premier League without much fanfare. Maybe that's because the transfer seemed to happen over the course of about 12 months.
And they've made 1,000 signings during that time as well.
Yeah, exactly. In Jackson, that's another classic case of a player being judged on pre-season where he scored a couple of good goals and Chelsea fans are getting very excited, but we'll have to see it more. But I wouldn't be surprised if Chelsea put last season well behind them. When you think about the players they've got, Enzo Fernandez, in my mind, has all the tools in his locker to be a properly elite central midfielder for the next decade or so, and Nkunku the same in the forward area. Certainly Reece James is that as well. They have players who are capable of being, I hate the term world class, but as good as it gets in their position in world football, and a manager now who should be able to put the ridiculous succession of Tuchel into Potter into Lampard to bed. This should be a really different campaign, and I think they'll go okay.
I think they've still got a few problems. I think goalkeeper is still a problem for me with Chelsea. I don't think Robert Sanchez comes in and is he any better than Kepa? I wouldn't say so. I think
he won't start. Surely Kepa's the first choice. Surely,
yeah, but they're saying he's to challenge him. But is he realistically going to challenge him? I wouldn't have thought so. Although I think he was ahead of him in the Spain pecking order for the World Cup. That doesn't really tell you anything. I think that central midfield area at the moment is a huge problem. They've got to rectify that. Who've they got there at the moment? Enzo, Santos, and Conor Gallagher are the three players that could potentially play there. I think if they sign Caicedo, that's a brilliant signing, and that really obviously helps with the central midfield. But at the moment, you're not going to finish top six with those central midfield options. It's just not going to happen. The bit I like about them is that you've always seen with Chelsea, if Reece James or Chilwell is out, they're not as good a team. They're just not. Kukureya's not done it. But in Maatsen and Gusto, I think they've got the right kind of backup to those players now. So I think that they'll be better when Reece James and Ben Chilwell pick up their inevitable injuries, because they're always injured. So they've rectified that. But I just look at that team at the moment and just think that there's too many problems. There's still a few things that need to be sorted out for them to be a top six team. Jonathan, what should Liverpool's ambitions be this season? What's a realistic aim for them?
They could challenge for the title. I think it's possible. I think they were artificially low. Artificially is the wrong word, but I don't think they're as bad as last season made them look. I think the nature of how Klopp plays his football, if the press goes wrong, everything looks terrible. It doesn't take much to go wrong for the whole thing to look awful. Even from that Fulham game, the opening weekend last season, you could tell from that Fulham game that there was something. There's a lack of bite there. They weren't quite as aggressive in the press as they have been. Now the question then is that a temporary thing to do with the fact they came so close to quadruple the season before, to do with the age of the squad, or is it to do with something in Klopp's method that somehow other clubs have caught them up? And I guess we don't really know that. But if it's the former, well, they've certainly got a younger squad, possibly too young in midfield. The rejigging of that forward line, which they tried to do last season, but ended up the injuries to Diaz and to Jota made that very difficult. They're all fit now. That forward line, I think, should be pretty much fit and firing from the start. And I think if they get the press right, then all the problems we saw with particularly Trent Alexander-Arnold, but also with even Van Dijk, I think they'll disappear. Once the press is working again, those issues aren't issues anymore. So, yeah, if they get the press working, they can challenge for the title. They certainly should be expecting to be top four, I think.
Yeah, I think both of these teams that we're talking about, I think a lot hinges on their central midfield signings. I think Liverpool are definitely one or two short, and Chelsea exactly the same, one or two short. So I think it'll be easier to judge both when the transfer window shut. But obviously, we'd expect both to be better than they were last season. But both seasons in the Premier League weren't great for either of those teams. We've got a combined 11 here, so I'll rattle off the who scored one quickly. We've got Alisson, Trent Alexander-Arnold, Thiago Silva, Virgil van Dijk and Andy Robertson, Enzo and McAllister sitting, Salah on the right, then Nkunku in the 10 and Szoboszlai, whose name I knew I was going to murder there, on the left, and then the lone striker is Cody Gakpo. Now, I believe that's the formation. Jonathan, is your 11 any different?
A bit. It's actually not that dissimilar. Alisson in goal. I went Reece James at right back just because of recent form, but Trent Alexander-Arnold, I don't have a huge problem with. I can't have a 38-year-old in my team. Come on.
Too old, isn't it?
Largely because Badiashile, I think, isn't fully over the thigh injury that ended last season. Fofana's injured again. And because I wanted the right-sided centre-back, I've gone for Matip with a level of concern. And Van Dijk, I'd like to have Colwell there, but you can't have him ahead of Van Dijk, and he's left-sided. So, Matip and Van Dijk, then Robertson at left-back. Enzo Fernandez at the back of midfield, flanked by McAllister and Szoboszlai. And then Salah. I went Darwin Nunez purely because of pre-season form at centre-forward, but not a problem with Gakpo there. And Diaz on the left. I was assuming that we're not allowed to pick unfit players.
I was going to say that's the first time I've ever heard someone not selected in the best 11 because of a thigh injury.
Well, because the rules in the past have always been for this weekend coming up. And so, I wouldn't mind playing Nkunku in a sort of a false nine role there rather than Darwin Nunez, but I've gone Nunez.
Do some season predictions then, the bit that no one ever gets right. So we'll start with your top 6, please, George.
City winning the league, Arsenal still second, United third, Liverpool fourth, Chelsea fifth, and Spurs sixth. I'm going for the classic big six.
No, I'm not having that. My top 4 was exactly the same as yours. Newcastle 5th and Villa 6th.
Shocked.
Jonathan, I'm telling you, Villa will be close to Champions League this year. Honestly, that's my big prediction.
Well, I've gone Sunderland top, Sunderland second, Sunderland third. I've gone City, Liverpool, Arsenal, United, Newcastle, Chelsea. My top 6.
You've got Chelsea in the top 6. Interesting. Yeah. Bottom 3, please, George.
Sheffield United, I've got coming bottom. Forest 19th, Fulham 18th.
Big drop off, Jonathan, because I've completely forgotten who one of the teams was in my bottom 3. Can you do your bottom 3, please?
Gone Luton bottom, Sheffield United second bottom, and Fulham third bottom.
Marco Silva's already said no to Saudi twice. I think he probably won't say no a third time if things don't start too well.
I've got my bottom 3 now. So Sheffield United bottom, Wolverhampton Wanderers 19th, and Luton 18th. We can probably move on for this next one quite quickly. Golden Boot.
Haaland?
Yep.
Haaland. But should we do one without Haaland?
Yeah, let's do it without him. That's what makes it more fun, doesn't it?
It's not necessarily without Haaland, but I do think it wouldn't surprise me if Saka has a goal-scoring season to blitz his last 2 totals. He's got 11 and 14 in the last 2 seasons, aged only 21. I think the way Arsenal play and the way they're set up will suit him. It wouldn't surprise me if he hits or gets near the 20 mark.
I'll just go Salah because I can't. It feels reliable. You could go Kane, I guess, if you think he might stay at Tottenham, Jonathan.
Rashford, maybe.
Yeah, nice. I was thinking Bruno Fernandes. I think he's got the captaincy now, hasn't he? They get a lot of pens. Maybe he could make his way. Be difficult without Kane, because obviously he's the obvious number 2 to go for, but we still don't know what's happening with him. Player of the year, George.
For reasons I just mentioned, I think Saka already one of the best players in English football. I think we'll take another step forward in his development.
Kevin De Bruyne again.
Kevin De Bruyne.
As I've said every year for the last decade, probably.
I'll go for Erdegaard, just as a throw one in there. Couldn't think of anyone else. And then the final one is first manager to go. But George, I think you've already touched on who you think that might be.
Possibly. I do think
there's a few candidates.
With Lopetegui, I think it wouldn't take much at all for him just to walk out. So I think he's probably the most likely, I would say. I also think if Forest starts slowly, and we've been here before already, but I think Steve Cooper's wouldn't last. I don't think he'll be given another new contract, even though I think he's by no means the issue with that club if things don't start well. No,
I'm going to go Lopetegui as well, but it's close between Marco Silva. I think could end up walking as well. It's tight between those two. I think Lopetegui in a few weeks will just have enough. I think Moyes will probably be the first one to actually get the sack, but I just think Lopetegui may walk.
Yeah, probably Marco Silva, though. I totally agree with you about Moyes. I think Hodgson maybe if Palace had a really bad start, and I know there's a lot of sort of mutual affection there, but there could be some sort of he feels the need to retire and shuffle him on at the end of September.
Thanks ever so much to you both for joining me. It's been a pleasure to chat to you both. We'll be back next week to preview game week 2, and do go back and check out all our season previews that we did. I can't remember if we did 7 or 8 Premier League teams in the end, but go back and check out those season previews as well. If you've enjoyed the video, give it a like and comment below if you agree with our predictions or not. Subscribe to the podcast as well, wherever you're listening to or watching it. Enjoy the football at the weekend. I absolutely can't wait.